Okay, everybody, before I jump into my review, unfortunately, just want to say that my microphone has failed me during this review, and I am about to sound like a chipmunk during it. So, this is your warning. If you don't mind that, or you just want to do subtitles, I would just go for that. I still wanted to post a review. I didn't want to not get my thoughts out there, but I am so sorry. The audio is going to be a little bit of a nightmare this week, and we'll get things smooth sailing next week. The mic has failed me. I have failed you. But let me know if you do watch. I will send you an award. Enjoy. Okay, everybody, this is my spoiler review of Succession Season 4, Episode 8, America Decides. Before I jump into my review, please subscribe. I am so excited to be doing Yellow Jackets, Succession, and celebrity interviews at the moment, so you're not want to miss any of that. And please follow me at Steve Varley Show on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok as well for more reviews. It is election night in this episode, and all the pressure here is on Tom to deliver and have ATN deliver. He's got to deliver in the ratings. He's also got this drama where he's stuck between these siblings who are about to basically, like when they picked the president, which I still think was silly when they picked the president last season, that they're now having all this influence, and how it shows the media has all this influence and businesses have over the media, and the media has over the country and the government, all in this episode shown really well, and it gets very intense very fast. What I really did like about this episode, though, is I did think a lot of humor this time worked again. At where I was saying last episode, I didn't feel like a lot of it landed, where so much with Tom here was just a joy to watch and was hysterical. I love his advisor comments on him wearing dress shoes during this night, saying that Sid wore comfortable shoes. And he's like, probably because she couldn't get her cloven hooves in her regular shoes. That was a great line. And then he sees Darwin wearing sneakers and he's like, oh, those are cool. And he goes, you don't do something special. I heard someone talking about adult diapers. I thought that was great. And Matthew McFadden does such a good job at showing the panic within Tom and the excitement. And it was just such a great performance by him. And he's still, to me, criminally underrated as an actor in this show. It's almost like this show just has an embarrassment of riches when it comes to the actors. They're all just great. Now, a big reveal here is that Greg spent the night out with Matsson's crew, and he found out through this that Shiv has a business plan behind the scenes with Matsson and tells Tom. And you see when then later in the episode Matsson calls Shiv, he mentions he hung out with Greg and talked to him last night. This sets the panic in for Shiv that she's about to get found out. And we also see Matsson doesn't really want to go public with these numbers like Shiv is really hell bent on it. They should go public with the India numbers. And it's interesting, Alexander Skarsgård said in an interview recently that Matsson is completely playing Shiv. So it's going to be interesting to see how that kind of colossally fails for Shiv, even being with Matsson in the coming next two episodes, and how much Matsson's using her here. Now, what I really liked to how they set this episode up is having Shiv and Roman on the complete opposite sides of who they want for president with Jimenez and Menkin, and then you had Kendall kind of being pulled back and forth in the middle during this episode and is more passive. And Rome starts pulling on Ken because he's like, if Jimenez wins, the deal's just going to go through with Matsson. So that's not what they want. But also subtly, which was great, in that moment, Menkin calls Roman and doesn't want to talk to Ken. He just wants to talk to Roman. So Ken, you see, is aware of that and doesn't like that. And like he will say to Shiv later on, that he feels threatened by that relationship and how much Roman is tight with Menkin. So that plays into Ken being conflicted in this episode. There's a lot of things that play into Ken being afflicted where he wants the Madison deal to be cut. So that would want him supporting Menkin. But then he also has his daughter in mind here. And he knows that Jimenez wins, it's good for his family. And that is on his mind. But then there's also, if Mencken wins, Roman might move up with that. But there's also, he's still in with the president if he wins, because they're making a backdoor deal, which can't be bad. So there's a lot going on in his head. And you see Ken at one point tries to again call Nate and actually talks to Jimenez and see if he can pull on Jimenez, because he doesn't want to end up having to do the Mencken part of it. He'd rather just have the deal cut by Jimenez, and then he could be happy, and it's a win for his family as well. But we'll see the hustle Roman makes here, where Mencken says he's expecting to lose, he wants the narrative spin, and how quickly Roman is really pulling all the strings and changing the narrative, and essentially getting him elected as president in that deal, that he will cut the Matsson deal. And Tom's really just there. He's again just letting Roman make the calls. And that's what disappoints Shiv. That's what makes Shiv disappointed in Tom in that big moment later in the episode, and calls him Pontius Pilate because he doesn't put his foot down. He could give two craps at this point about what is even happening with these siblings. And I still think being coked out and he's processing, learning that Shiv was pregnant this episode, I just think Tom's in a really bad place and kind of just let things kind of go here. Not in the right mindset for this. But I did think it was hysterical that Tom did coke with Greg and peer pressured Greg to do coke with him. And I love he was like, I need Greg tonight to be Gregging for Tom. That was great. And he's yelling about the bodega sushi. Now we see Connor calls Tom, is like, is there any film in these cameras? I'm not seeing what we're filming going on ATN. He's getting no coverage from them. And you see in the beginning, Connor's already lying to himself that he's happy that he didn't drop out. And Will is even like, it's Schrodinger's cat to say. That was great. But we'll see Connor actually get smart here. And because of not dropping out, he actually has more leverage on Menkin and that he can propose, I will concede to Menkin. And now he actually gets a much better situation than he was originally proposed by Menkin. So it is a win for Connor, but Will is even like, oh, he's really right wing. I don't know we should do this. But then they talk about the location you're being, the food, and they completely forgot about that. So he sells his soul, but he still gets in his concession speech that the con heads are coming. I thought that was great. But Connor has no morals here. I love this quick humorous moment that happens too, where Tom's advisor comes in and is telling him about what Menken's people in the streets are doing, the intimidation, and that should we cover this? And he's like, nah. And then when she says the other side smashed a camera in Portland, she's like, should we cover that? And he's like, I trust you. That was great. And then another great moment with Tom, which was just killing it this episode, was when he's on the phone with Shiv and she has Nate on the line and they're saying to cover the fire in Wisconsin. And he's like, well, bully for Nate. And he's like, hey, Tom. And he goes, hey, Nate. I thought that was great. And it's so funny when then he gives the phone to Greg to talk to Kendall and Shiv. And he's like, talk to Greg. And Greg has all this plan of what to do. And they just hang up. And I'm like, yeah, we're not talking to Greg. That was so great. And where you see Roman take charge in this episode is when Mencken asks Roman to spin the narrative on the Wisconsin fire. This is when Roman breaks his dad's rule of no brass on the battlefield. And that's where it sets everyone off. Shiv's going on the floor. Kendall's going on the floor. And Greg hysterically is trying to just round them up to bring him back up with no success the whole episode. Now, this big moment happens where Shiv takes Tom aside and apologizes for what she said the night before, but also, of course, in such a Shiv way, is like, and it gives you the opportunity to like apologize to her right away. And he goes, you scared I'm gonna blab on Matsson, which is totally true. And then Tom says, speaking on her father, you also sort of killed him. And then she responds by telling Tom that she's pregnant. So I thought that was going to happen on the balcony last week. It doesn't, but it happens here, which makes sense to kind of set Tom off into this almost shell shocked state as the episode goes on. And he says, is that even true or even new tactic, which really breaks Shiv's heart and just shows how tragic it's ended up with this relationship that they're at that point and talking to each other like that about something you would have thought they'd been celebrating back in the day. Now, I just loved watching Shiv and Roman go head to head here about the Wisconsin fire and whether to address the burnt votes or not. And Roman's just shutting it down. And Ken's just in the middle of them worried about the Matsson deal. He's worried about his implications on his daughter, everything. And watching Roman and Shiv fight, how I could relate to that was like, that was the type of fight you see with friends, but when they're doing like a fantasy football league and arguing about like a rule, if you've ever been in that situation, or something similar, maybe a board game, it wouldn't stop. Like it's just chaos and no one's seeing eye to eye. I just thought it was great. And like I've always said about the show, I could watch the siblings together and just hash it out for hours, especially those three, those actors. It's incredible. It's just a great case of an ensemble, just perfect together. But Roman takes a step ahead and sends talking points to Ravenhead. This was big that Ravenhead was the one saying these talking points in favor of Mencken because you can really see how it's affecting Ken seeing that because it's right in his face now about Ravenhead. Because remember, the bully on his daughter had a Ravenhead shirt on. Now, I will say, watching this episode the second time, I do think it's a little bit of a cheat how muted Kendall is this episode and unconfident because I know he's weighing two things and it's hard on him, but I still feel like it was Kendall from last season, not the Kendall we've seen the last two episodes. I feel like he was a little more built up in confidence in himself at this point, and it's so muted with him this episode that maybe it was a little bit of a stretch, in my opinion, of consistency of where we were at with him. I'm curious if anyone else felt that way. Now, Shiv grabs Greg and literally tells him she will kill him if he squeals. And Greg's like, well, silence is golden. How golden? Wanting an offer to stay silent. And Shiv sticks with the offer that if he stays silent, she won't kill him. Which really wasn't a good move by Shiv. I think she should have offered him something because you'll see later on, Greg is the one to squeal to Ken when he's on to Shiv. Now, Roman confirms officially to Ken that if Menkin wins, he is going to for sure block the deal. This is what really hurts the pitch for Shiv to Kendall because when Shiv is lying about talking to Nate and that she's convinced Nate about him and as possibly blocking the deal, she's giving them, I've got a feeling they're going to do it. But like Roman says, I'm giving solid confirmation that Menkin will do this. So in Ken's mind, when he's putting above everything else still the Matsson part of this, that it's always safer to go with the sure thing. And we see Roman again just going full the dark side of Roman here, putting his foot down to Tom and Darwin saying call Wisconsin. And they eventually agree to it, calling it a pending call on the state, which really is again calling Wisconsin. Now, the only humorous part I don't know really didn't land to me this episode was the wasabi going into Darwin's face from the bodega sushi. It was a nice setup early in the episode having the bodega sushi there, but I don't think the punchline was that great in that whole moment. I thought it was kind of goofy. And you see that Mencken now wins Arizona. So Roman's like, call the election. And this is big. And that's why Kendall's like, well, hold up a second, because this is the big choice happening now. It's a huge thing. And it's just crazy to see how casual Roman is about it and the weight of this man becoming president. And I love how they had Ken and Roman here talking about when they were kids that Roman always wanted steak and Ken wanted chicken, and they always gave the chicken the parents. And he says it's because Roman always tantrumed he would never get the steak, but Roman's like, well, I would never get the steak, so that's why I tantrumed. It's a great line to put there because it's showing you Roman psychology and why he's the way he is, right? And that he feels he is not getting the stake in life, and that's why he does behave the way he does. And yeah, he's like a grown child tantruming. That's his way. And you see, Roman's like, we are literally, if we do this, we're in the president's pocket here. And Ken's hesitant. He's like, well, he's a fascist. Roman's like, come on, you can't send your hands and let this go away. Now, this is where this huge scene happens where it leads Ken to go to Shiv. And he goes to Shiv explaining to her, like, hey, Mencken will block the deal if we do this. And he's saying that thinking Shiv wants that to happen. That's where they think Shiv is at, and they don't know about what she's doing behind the scenes. But then Ken goes and says he feels it could just be him being the CEO like he did in the sand, number one, right? At the end of the day, he wants it just to be him. And he mentions to Shiv, though, he's honest, like, I'm threatened by Roman and Megan's relationship, and that's why he's not so sure about this. But Shiv goes, well, also, you're a good guy. And he's like, I don't know. And this sucks because Ken really was then leaning in this moment to maybe doing the right thing. Because, Shiv's saying the right thing too. Like, Menken's the nightmare here. Like, this is above this deal. And he says, I don't think I'm a very good father. Maybe the poison drips through. Now, that question, maybe the poison drips through, about him becoming his father, is what we see happen with Kendall this episode. I saw commenters on my channel smartly point out that he's been dressing more and more like Logan. And you see it in a big moment when him and Shiv fight later on when he's like, imitating her stuttering, just like Logan did in the season 3 finale last season to Shiv. And that's why Kendall here, it's so frustrating because he just is like, Shiv, just try one more time. He wants it just to happen that they get it through to Jimenez, through Nate, to block the deal so they can just go that way. And again, it keeps it more morally right. It's more morally right for his family and his daughter. But what screws us all up is that Ken senses something's off with Shiv here. And so does Roman. And they're not buying what Shiv's saying. It's not strong. And it's leading Kendall also in his fear of like going with the side that's not as strong with the guarantee with Mencken of blocking the deal to call Nate himself. What annoys me though is when Ken walked out with his phone, it was a little confusing how he was so still sure that Shiv was full of it. And it was a little convenient that Greg was right there at the right time to just spill the beans and say it to him by walking over. I'm still not sure how I felt about that and how it was all connected. It felt a little sloppy and how they officially figured it out just by gut instinct. But Greg squealed to Ken and confirmed that Shiv is in bed with Matsson, and he's like, Shiv is effing us. What sucks, what's sad about this is like Ken's now pride getting in the way, Ken becoming Logan as a reaction to this, and it's this sibling competition between the three of them and them hurting each other at the end of the day in their selfish desires. And Ken was getting a clearer mind about it, but resorts back to his old ways here. Like, becoming his father. And Shiv goes about it the wrong way, doing it behind the back with Matsson, but she's justifiably angry as she's always pushed out by her brothers, so they're not in the wrong here, and it makes sense Shiv would go that way. But she's so right about you can't just have Mencken become president and do this messed up thing. But to me, Ken was so angry here that he went with Roman just to spite Shiv in that moment because he was pissed at the betrayal. And that's when Tom comes in. She calls him Punches Pile because he does nothing at their call to call it and call Menkin the president. This is why Jeremy Strong's a brilliant actor. He's like seeing Menkin being called president. You could see he doesn't feel good instinctually about it, but he can justify it. He can say, he's a guy we can do business with. And Roman's like, we just made a night of good TV. Don't worry, nothing happens. And Shiv's like, yeah, things do happen when you do this. And you see, though, Mencken calls Roman, not Ken, not a speakerphone thing in front of Ken, and that threat Ken feels and jealousy of that relationship. And Shiv storms out, calls Matsson's like, we're going to F them so hard, and we got to release those numbers. But again, I can't stop thinking about Alexander Skarsgård saying that Matsson is playing Shiv here. So this is going to backfire for Shiv, I feel like. And Ken says to himself in the car, after trying to see his kids, it's too late. Some people just can't cut a deal for crap. Sounding so much like Logan here, and it's sad. I feel like there's a part of Ken that doesn't believe he's a good father at all and doesn't have self confidence to be a good person. He just doesn't think he's a good person, especially what happened with the waiter and that situation, that death. I hope they've addressed that again at some point with these 2 episodes left. But overall, I feel like Roman, Kendall, Shiv, they are setting up now for this tragic ending with the three of them. It's fitting for this show. Now, I'm a Kendall stan, so as a Kendall stan, I am a little frustrated that he's 1 step forward, always 2 steps back, and that's happening again here. But it's written so well and convincingly, having a moment where he could have made the right choice, and he chooses anger and business and spite over that, like his father, not family first. So that really stood out to me as great writing. And I thought it was just a really strong episode. I'm giving it a 9.4. Again, I don't know if Kendall was at the full muted spot he was as this character we've seen progress this season, but still really, really loved it. And I thought, man, the writing was so sharp this episode. And again, watching the siblings combat each other is so entertaining. And Tom is so great and he's so funny. But I'm happy, in a sense, too, to be done with the election stuff because, like I've told and said, I'm not crazy about the president's storyline. It's when Succession you feel a little silly when it's too much in the power of picking the president and picking the election. And then it's going into other show territory like the newsroom, the West Wing. But I still really like this. And I still also, though, want to point out it is a little crazy that Jesse Armstrong said that episode 8 was going to be the most shocking episode. Come on. What was shocking? There wasn't anything shocking about what happened. I mean, it was like, yeah, this makes sense. I'm not shocked at all. There's no mouth dropping moments. I don't know why he said that. Episode 3 was clearly the most shocking episode. I don't think that's going to be topped with the father dying, but still really good. I'm giving this one 9.4. And we have the big funeral episode next week. So that's where I feel like we're going to get the heart of the show back. Like, I'm happy to be done with the election stuff and the Mencken stuff. And let's just go now and resolve the family drama and the family arcs we've had of every character, every sibling, this show. And also with Tom, too. I'm excited to see that. So I think this funeral one, I'm very, very hyped for it being the penultimate episode of the show as a whole. So excited for that. Let me know what you thought down below this episode. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I read every comment. I try to respond to as many as I can. And I'll see you next week.